You're listening to The Manning Report with your host, James David Manning. The news behind the headlines.
I think people listen to me now. I don't think I have a large Fox audience anymore, people that were basically people that watch Fox News. I don't think that I have them anymore. But there might be some, and some of you may have contacts with people that watch Fox News, and people that watch Fox News don't watch anything else. They don't watch CNN. The only thing they get from CNN or MSNBC or ABC or CBS or some of the alphabets is what Fox clippets or snippets as something that, maybe that Anderson Cooper said or that April Ryan said, or that's what they get. They don't get the full catch of what's happening. And we become very partisan in our media watching. And if they get something from the Washington Post or New York Times, and Tribulation Trump will take it and say it's fake news. And we got at least 39 to 40% of the American population that believes that. What I want to do today is I want to play a segment from CNN that ran on yesterday with Jake Tapper and Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. And there's several major issues going on. One is Sharpie Gate, where Tribulation Trump draws a line on the projected path of Hurricane Dorian, and to show that it could have reached Alabama. It was an additional line. It wasn't even in sync with the National Ocean Atlantic Association. Let me stop trying to get the name correctly. The NOAA. They had positioned the map. Trump took their map and drew another bubble on it. And they call it a Sharpie drawing. And then he said he doesn't know who did it. And then there was this whole business. As you know, today now is 9/9. Today is September the 9th. The year is 2019. 2 days from today will be 9/11. And 18 years ago, a horrific event took place here in New York City, where two airplanes flew into the north and south tower of the World Trade Center, and those two buildings came tumbling down. It was a horrific day, one that I will never forget where I was at when that happened and what I did thereafter. And I'm sure most Americans and people globally will never forget 9/11. Well, we're 2 days from the 18th anniversary of that. And a large number of the people that are in the business of knowing who potentially could have knocked those buildings down, and not that I necessarily agree with everybody's thoughts, believe that somehow or another it was the Taliban. Now, you need to know the Taliban at the time that those buildings were knocked down. They'd come to power back in the late 1990s. They were first the Mujahideen, and they'd set up camp in Afghanistan. Osama bin Laden and others were working their, if you will, so-called terrorist designs against the West. They're in Afghanistan. The Mujahideen later became the Taliban, and they took over the government of Afghanistan for a brief period of time. But what many people believe is that it was the Taliban that knocked down those buildings, while 19 of those, or at least 17, and I'll get the numbers correct, the participants in that event on that day on 9/11 were from Saudi Arabia. And some of them had studied in German, had learned to speak the Islamic language along with the German language, and were studying engineering and other subject matters there in Germany and in other places. And some of them have lived as sleeper cells here in America, and had taken airline courses and had done a number of things. And then they came together and up in Massachusetts and one other place, and got on those planes that morning and knocked down those towers. Now that's the story that we're getting from the mainstream or the dung-hid media. That's the story we're getting. And let's just assume that story is correct for the moment. You don't have to totally agree with it, but let's assume that it is, that it was the Taliban that knocked down those World Trade Centers. And we're 2 days away from the actual 18th year celebration of that. Tribulation Trump allegedly invited the leaders of the Taliban to Washington to meet with him in Camp David to talk peace talks of troop withdrawal from Afghanistan and also some sort of a peace with the Taliban and the West. There are a couple of things that need to be observed about this, and I'll try to cover them as best I can in category. The thing number one about Tribulation Trump inviting the Taliban to peace talks here in America is that it is clearly understood that the Taliban, their beliefs, the number of people that have been killed, their deep held religious beliefs in the Quran and in jihad and in other aspects of their faith will not permit them to ever enter into any kind of a peace agreement with the West, with the J-Fifth man, or with America. That is number one. And anybody who knows anything about the religious beliefs of the Taliban, or the Jihadin, or ISIS, or any of these other organizations that are Islamic organizations, they do not do bipartisan, they do not compromise their beliefs or their ideals. They don't compromise them. So for Tribulation Trump to think that somehow or another, listen, we've been in Afghanistan now for 17 years. It's the longest war in American history. Why? Because unlike the Japanese, or unlike the Germans, or unlike the others that we've had wars with, the Taliban do not believe in compromise nor treaty. They believe only in complete annihilation of the infidel. And so the very premise of the fact that Tribulation Trump would invite them to Washington, obviously he thinks that the rest of the world does not know that they do not compromise. And if the Taliban had agreed, and I don't know that they actually agreed to come to Washington, but if they agreed to come to Washington, it would have only been to have America surrender to them and state that they're going to withdraw all forces, all 14,000 soldiers that are left in Afghanistan. The only reason they would have come would have been have to receive, for Tribulation Trump to tell them that America is conceding a loss and are withdrawing all of their troops. But they would have never reached a peace. There would have been no peace accord. There would have been no Menachem Begin and Anwar Sadat. That would not have happened at Camp David. And anybody who knows anything about, the Taliban theology and the Islamic theology would know that peace is not possible. Would know that. That's number one. Number two, most Americans believe that the Taliban was involved in the killing of the 3,000 people that died on 9/11 and bringing down those buildings, an attack upon America, unlike any attack except for Pearl Harbor on American soil, that a war was brought to American soil. Horror, it has changed the way we do business in America forever. Most people would be insulted that the Taliban would be given an invitation to set foot on American soil without having repented for, or shown some act of contrition or some act of the admittance of wrong, that they can just come to America after having obliterated those two buildings. That it would be an insult to invite the Taliban into America and to sit down in Camp David with our highest officials. That is absolutely unbelievable that Tribulation Trump would invite them to come to America under such circumstances. And then the thing number three, which is most horrific, is to invite the Taliban to come to America during the week of 9/11, when all America will be again mourning that horrific event 18, 19, 17 years ago, whatever it was. To invite the Taliban to come on the day that they knocked down those twin towers, to come on 9/11? I mean, how ridiculous was that thought and idea that they were invited to come? I mean, it doesn't get any worse than that. And those three things in general, the Taliban will never negotiate peace. They don't negotiate peace. You ever heard of, suicide bombers? The suicide bomber killed an American soldier last week. Taliban Muslim men are different from American ideology men. They believe that when they die, that they're going to heaven and they're going to get 70 virgins. But even if they don't get the 70 virgins, they don't get the idea of listen, the makeup of the Islamic ISIS, Taliban, Mujahideen, and other smaller Islamic groups is that whether living or dead, they're serving the purpose of Allah. And they don't have a problem with dying. That's not a problem for them. What they would do is that they would die before they sign a peace treaty. They would die before they compromise. So how could Mike Pompeo, the Secretary of State, Tribulation Trump, John Bolton, if he's involved in the process, I don't know that he is, and other people around Tribulation Trump, Mick Mulvaney, how could they prepare to bring the Taliban to an event that they would die? You know what potentially could have happened? One of them could have brought a suicide bomb and blew up Camp David. That's how ridiculous this is. And by the way, what planes were they going to come in on? I don't know if the Taliban have their own air force. Are they going to ask the King of Saudi Arabia to provide them with an airliner to bring them to New York, to Washington? And so then they could bring, a suicide bomber and blow up Trump and Camp David. This is absolutely ridiculous. But you know what happened? What's happening here? Maybe all this information is known. I can't imagine that Mike Pompeo, he's a pretty smart guy. He's a West Point guy. He's a smart guy, Mike Pompeo. Mick Mulvaney as well. I can't imagine that he doesn't know this. I can't imagine he didn't try to tell Trump, don't do this, don't bring this. But here's what Trump likes to do. Trump just loves to do this, and it's like he doesn't really give a damn one way or the other after he does it. Trump just wants to photo op. Trump's want to be seen sitting down in Camp David with the Taliban. He knows he's not, just like with Kim Jong-un. He's had 3 summits with Kim Jong-un and still no deal has been reached. Kim Jong-un is still making nuclear weapons and still firing missiles and still has not released his nuclear category of arsenal. And Trump ain't gonna never get it, but he loves to sit down. He loves to get the cameras on him. He loves to step across the line from North Korea to South Korea, and all the cameras of the world are watching him. That's all he wants is a photo op. He's not expecting any peace. He knows it ain't gonna be no peace. And we all here, anybody with an ounce of brain knows there ain't gonna be no peace. Trump just wants to look good. He just wants to look good. The boy's sick. So this weekend, on Saturday evening, I think it was, that Trump called off the meeting with the Talibans. Sent out a tweet. He didn't even call them officially. He sent out a tweet and said he's no longer meeting with the Taliban. He's no longer meeting with them because they were boasting about killing of this soldier in a suicide bombing in Afghanistan and Kabul the other day. And as a result of that, he wasn't going to meet with them. My question is, and the question of Jake Tapper and others, is that, listen, the Taliban have been killing suicide bombing soldiers for years. Why did this one killing all of a sudden stop the process from going forward? In the midst of the fact that Trump is also now still doubling down and tripling down and quadrupling down on the fact that Hurricane Dorian was supposed to hit Alabama. And he's got people from the state of Alabama, I guess, weather, hurricane, whatever it is that they're doing. He's got them stating that they released a statement on Saturday night or Sunday morning that the hurricane potentially could have reached Alabama. But now they got this thing called Sharpie Gate where Trump just drew a circle and it wasn't even correspondent with the original projections. As you can see, the original projection have the scope of the hurricane encompassing most of Florida, but it doesn't reach Alabama. Then somebody with a black Sharpie draws a black line on the top of what the National Oceanic Association have done, and makes it reach Alabama, which is a lie. And Trump got up there and promoted that because he had said that was going to happen. I remember myself hearing him say that the hurricane was going to reach Alabama. I thought to myself, Alabama? How's it tell you it ain't going that far? It might be bad, but it ain't that bad. Anyway, what I want to have happen now is that I want you to listen to Jake Tapper talk to Mike Pompeo and watch Mike Pompeo get hit with some real tough questions and watch how he lies his way out of it. And by the way, now what Mike Pompeo does is not unlike what most politicians do under most circumstances. So I'm not going to give him a bad grade above all the other bad grades that have been given by politicians who obfuscate, who dodge the question, who put spin on an issue. He does that. But I want you to watch Jake Tapper's face as he looks at him like he said, boy, you lying your tongue off. You lying. And then we'll come back and talk more about all the people that are now lying for Tribulation Trump. So if you never watched CNN, you wouldn't have seen this if you're a Fox watcher. And but Mr. Engineer, go ahead and roll that piece so we can, and I'm going to let it run. It's going to run for a few minutes. Consider all the things that we say because you're going to hear them come up in a different way from Jake Tapper.
Joining me now to talk about all this, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. Secretary Pompeo, thanks so much for joining us. When did you find out that the Taliban were coming to Camp David, and when did you find out that the meeting had been canceled?
Jake, it's great to be with you this morning. I actually just a few hours ago was out at Dover Air Force Base for the dignified transfer of the returns of Sergeant First Class Barreto, and it reminded me of the obligation President Trump and our team has to deliver on the commitments the president made, which are to make sure that we never have a terror strike or reduce the risk that we have a terror strike come from Afghanistan, and second, to make sure that we put our young men and women at risk as little as possible. That's been our mission set as we've tried to negotiate this peace and reconciliation deal with the Afghan government and with the Taliban. And part of that was the president's effort to bring the Afghan leaders as well as the Taliban here to Washington to have a conversation about how after now almost 2 decades, we could begin to take down levels of violence, get the Afghans talking, and really make progress so that after now almost 2 decades, America's billions and billions of dollars of commitment, all the lives and sacrifice that Americans had made would be properly honored.
And when did you find out that the Taliban were coming here, and when did you find out the meeting had been canceled?
So we've been working on those for a while, and it was the case that when the Taliban tried to gain negotiating advantage by conducting terror attacks inside of the country, President Trump made the right decision to say that's not going to work. We're going to walk away from a deal if others try to use violence to achieve better ends in a negotiation. It's not right. It's not appropriate. It killed an American. And it made no sense for the Taliban to be rewarded for that kind of bad behavior.
The Taliban have obviously been doing these kinds of attacks and killing U.S. service members and innocent civilians for a generation, as you note. What is different about the murder of the 16th U.S. service member this year as opposed to the previous 15?
We've been working on this peace and reconciliation program for quite some time. And we'd made real progress. We had the Taliban agreeing to, for the first time. I remember when President Bush tried to get the Taliban to make a commitment to break with al-Qaeda. The Taliban had agreed to do that. They'd agreed to certain reductions in violence. They'd agreed for the first time, Jake, as you know, to sit down with their Afghan brothers and sisters and talk about the right process forward. Jake, it's also the case. We haven't been negotiating while they've been killing us, and we've been standing still. We've been taking it to the Taliban as well. Over 1,000 Taliban killed in just the last 10 days alone. So the American people should know we're going to defend American national interest. We're going to be tough in making sure that we put pressure on all the powers, all the risks, not just the Taliban, but ISIS that's there in Afghanistan as well. President Trump will always protect Americans and the American interest. And one of the ways we're trying to do that is to take down the violence levels in Afghanistan so that we can rebalance. We've got challenges from terrorism, not just in Afghanistan, Jake, as you well know. We have to make sure we have the right force levels, the right force postures, the right people each and every place so that we're protecting America's national security everywhere, not just in Afghanistan.
Is the president willing to restart peace negotiations with the Taliban? And if so, is there a precondition that they have to agree to a ceasefire?
Yeah, we've got to see. You saw what President Ghani said this morning, too. That's his ask. We need to see a significant commitment in two ways. One, we need to see that they're committed to it. And second, we need to see that they're capable of delivering on the promises that they've made. This has been something that multiple administrations have tried. President Trump made clear, we're not just going to withdraw because there's a timeline. We're only going to reduce our forces when certain conditions are met. And if we can't get those conditions met, just like the president has walked away from a deal with the North Koreans, just like the president has walked away from entrees from the Iranian government, if it's not right, if it's not protecting the American people, if the conditions aren't appropriate on the ground and proper to protect America, we're not going to enter into any deal.
I want to read you a tweet by Republican Congressman Adam Kinzinger, an Air Force veteran who has served in Afghanistan. He wrote, quote, "Never should leaders of a terrorist organization that has not renounced 9/11 and continues in evil be allowed in our great country. Never, full stop," unquote. I think there are a lot of Americans out there who are surprised that the Taliban had been invited to Camp David, especially the week of the 9/11 commemoration.
Yeah, I know Adam well. I served alongside him as a member of the House of Representatives. I have enormous respect for him and for his service, continued service in the United States Air Force. President Trump is working to construct an arrangement where we can take down the very violence that I know Congressman Kinzinger wants taken down. And that renunciation, that break from the past is precisely what Ambassador Khalilzad and my team have been working on for months and months now. We have made real progress, but to your point, Jake, it's not just about commitments. We have to see them be able to deliver it. We have to have proof that it's delivered. And when we get to that point, when American national security interests can be protected, I am confident President Trump will continue the process of trying to get what he has talked about since his campaign, is a reduction of our risk level and the cost to the American people, both in terms of life and treasure there in Afghanistan.
I don't think anyone begrudges the president or Ambassador Khalilzad trying to bring an end to this war that has been going on so long with so many innocent people and so many U.S. service members killed. But I guess the question is, why invite the Taliban to Camp David?
We've been having conversations. The president believed that we could further that we could further America's national interest by having conversations with the people that have the capacity to actually deliver, Jake, on what you just described. That was the effort. That was the mission. That was the purpose that President Trump has laid out. But I think, as you saw, if the Taliban don't behave, if they don't deliver on the commitments that they've made to us now for weeks and in some cases months, the President of the United States is not going to reduce the pressure. We're not going to reduce our support for the Afghan security forces that have fought so hard there in Afghanistan. You
know, it was just a few weeks ago, and I'm sure you're well aware of this, it was just a few weeks ago that the Taliban put out a video in which they supported the 9/11 attacks, reiterating their support for the 9/11 attacks, blaming the 9/11 attacks on the United States and foreign policy. I guess the question would be, here is an organization that still supports 9/11, still believes that the United States was to blame. We brought that on ourselves. Why bring people like that to Camp David? I understand why you want to negotiate for peace, but why bring people like that to Camp David?
Jake, we're trying to get this accomplished. The American people are demanding it now, almost 2 decades, and the loss of life. When I was with that family last night, amazing patriots, almost the whole family. Sergeant Barretto's father himself served honorably in the United States Armed Forces. We have an obligation to do everything we can to protect those men and women and take down that risk. That's what President Trump was aiming to do. We understand who the Taliban are. There's no more clear-eyed administration. When I was the director of the CIA, I had young men and women serving in Afghanistan, taking enormous risk to their lives. We're aiming to get this right. We're working to talk with those leaders that can actually deliver on these outcomes. That's what President Trump and I are both focused on, and we're going to keep driving towards that outcome.
A UN Security Council team in July of this year said that al-Qaeda, quote, considers Afghanistan a continuing safe haven for its leadership, relying on its long-standing and strong relationship with the Taliban, unquote. I guess the question I have is, you keep talking about President Trump saying he believed that having the Taliban at Camp David, along with Afghan President Ghani, that he would be able to get this peace negotiations going. What about you? What did you think? Did you have any problem with the Taliban being invited to Camp David? You're an Army veteran. I can't help but think that if a Democratic president had talked about having the Taliban come to Camp David to negotiate a peace process that was not already a done deal, that you, as a congressman, as a soldier, as a veteran, as a West Point graduate, that you would be rather upset.
Yeah, Jake, you're just wrong about that. I've been fully supportive of this effort. The direction that we have taken at the State Department, the effort President Trump has given us guidance to go deliver on it.
Let me chime in now that it's absolutely incredible. I understand that, the world is a very dangerous place, and more dangerous perhaps than we can ever imagine. And I would also think that the intelligence agencies of our nation and allied nations keep us safer than we can ever begin to imagine. And so a large number of things that take place at the heads of state, whether here or in China or someplace else, are something that cannot be always fully explained to the American populace or to the populace of such states. But it is obvious that the Taliban do not negotiate peace. They don't do that. George Bush tried that. They don't do it. They will lie and say that they will, but they don't negotiate peace. The Quran will not allow them. If any Muslim, any Taliban, Muslim, Mujahideen, Al-Qaeda, ISIS, sit down at a table and negotiate, they are really not negotiating on behalf of the Taliban or ISIS or Al-Qaeda, because those groups do not negotiate no more so than they negotiate the strength of the verses in the Quran. So, and Mike Pompeo is a graduate of West Point. I think he graduated West Point at the top of the class. So he's not an idiot. He's a pretty smart guy. But Trump has been able to browbeat these people into, even John Bolton, who's everybody knows is a hawk and wants to go to war with everybody, has been kept out of the loop. John Bolton has not been brought into the process. He has been ostracized. Trump does not invite him to meetings. Trump's a kind of like a little boy at the schoolyard who picks up his ball and walks away. He's having a meeting about a security meeting with the Taliban, and he doesn't invite his national security advisor, John Bolton. They say, don't bring him in. It's like, it's sickening. And these men have to be humiliated like little boys because Trump is a real degenerate. I mean, he is a despicable character. This is a bit of a news blog we do looking at spiritual wickedness in high places for the most part, making some observations about it and giving people a biblical foundation to the way of interpreting rather than have Sean Hannity or Laura Ingraham or Janine Pirro or Anderson Cooper or Rachel Maddow or Don Lemon, Rush Limbaugh interpret what's going on in the world. You come to me and I'll tell you based on what the Word of God says. They'll just give you their worldly, sinful view. But the Manning Report will tell you what God has said, whether to say yea or nay, whether to go or to stay. You'll be led by the word of Almighty God. Come to the Manning Report on a daily basis to interpret the spiritual wickedness in high places, because there's plenty of it that's going on. And so I'm the Lord's servant, James David Righteous Rebel Manning, and I'm here to serve you with news and information.